Welcome to Nuts and Bolts, a new venture for the Financing Sources panel. I'm going to start off showing you a short video from the Kauffman Foundation that talks about where people get their money. And then I'm going to turn it over to Julianne Zimmerman, who has organized this panel and will introduce herself and the panel. So let me start with the video.
Most young companies need money, which may or may not come as a big surprise, but they do. The number one source they get money from is from their own savings. Whether it's a few $100s or even thousands of dollars, that's what we tend to tap first. And a lot of companies don't get money from any other place. They get money from their own savings, and then after that, they're lucky enough to be cash flow positive. They're profitable. So we talk a lot as if all companies require all sorts of external capital, and the reality is that more than half of young companies get all their funding from a combination of founder savings and then cash flow from the business, and we're out of here. Next up on the list is another one that catches, I think, people by surprise, and that's credit cards. Almost every young company you can think of, to one degree or another, was funded on credit cards. And it is the single largest source of capital for young companies after founder savings. And then the next place where they tend to get money is from friends and family. After I've tapped out my credit card and I've used up all my savings, I turn to people I know and say, hey, will you help me? And that's the third biggest source of capital. And then the next place is banks. And the banks are a totally weird situation because with banks, they get a lot of attention, but they actually fund very, very few young companies. But it's not their fault. You have to think about the way bank lending works and how shareholders want banks to lend. They want them to lend money against secured assets. And young companies don't have any security. They have nothing to secure it against. And the joke in the industry is you can get all the bank funding you want as a startup as long as you don't need it. And then the last piece is venture capitalists. They get the lion's share of the attention, which in some ways is warranted. You know, your Googles and Apples and FedExes and many others all have venture capital money inside of them. But the reality is, and this is from Kauffman research, less than 20% of the fastest growing companies in the United States took any venture money. And that's not because the VCs wouldn't give it to them. It's because they didn't want it or didn't need it, because they had all those other sources. I don't need money, and I certainly don't need money on these terms. Because, venture capitalists, unlike banks, they don't lend against secured assets. They give you money in exchange for shares. So they take some of your company away. So my answer is if you don't need it, definitely don't get it. There's no question the venture industry has become staid. The irony is it's intended to fund disruption, and yet it's an industry that had become complacent. And interestingly, over the last 5 or 6 years, we've seen the emergence of other mechanisms for funding, like AngelList, like these kinds of peer-to-peer funding sources, as people increasingly provide capital in smaller amounts, but more people doing it directly. Having said all of that, though, venture capitalists are hugely important for those young companies that don't have access to bank money, but are growth companies. They have the prospect of being a $5 million or a $10 million company in a couple of years, and they need that growth capital to get there quickly. So it's a race. And the way you play the race is by getting money from people like venture capitalists who give you the money so you can compete with other people who are racing as fast as you are. If you can run a company off cash flow and some combination of credit card, your own savings, and friends and family, Bob's your uncle, run, keep all the equity, because, there's no better thing than being in full control of your own destiny.
So how many of you have even thought about other forms of capital other than venture capital before coming to this class? All right. Fairly good fraction, actually a higher fraction than I usually see. Tonight we're going to have 3 panelists share with you a variety of perspectives. Certainly not all of the kinds of capital that you might contemplate, but several of them. Tatiana Stashkina is with LearnLaunch, and she has a perspective to share on incubators, accelerators, as well as early stage investing from pre-seed on up to Series A. Carrie Bowie, who comes to us with experience, a variety of experience, but who represents both sort of resource support for young growing companies, so offsetting capital need, as well as early stage investing through a couple of different arms. And James Daly is here with us from Needham Bank, representing the banker's perspective, and I expect he'll have a little bit of pushback on the animation. Before we get started, first I want to set some questions in your minds. A lot of times people come into these conversations. By the way, I'm Julianne Zimmerman. Sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. I have been variously an engineer, co-founder, seed stage investor, and venture investor, as well as a mentor and advisor to a bunch of companies. So before you even start thinking about what kind of capital am I going after and how do I meet the appropriate capital sources, I want to plant a couple of other questions in your mind. So first, before you even start talking about capital, it's really important to get completely clear, as concretely clear as you possibly can, on your ultimate objective. What will you use as the measure for whether this enterprise has met your aspirations, right? And that's not just a number. That's not just a revenue number. It's not just an exit number. It might include those things, but you're starting a company presumably for a variety of reasons. You have aspirations which include financial criteria, but others as well. So as clear as you can possibly be on what will constitute success for you as a founder. What will make the next however many years you're going to commit of your life to this endeavor ultimately worthwhile and rewarding for you? What resources do you have? Those resources are including financial resources, of course, but they include other resources as well. What access to resources do you have that would offset your need for capital? Do you have access, for example, to facilities you can utilize at reduced rent or rent-free? Do you have access to equipment you can borrow, or to other kinds of resources that offset your need to have capital to pay for those things? And then what resources do you still need? Beyond what you have, what do you still need? What are the gaps you need to cover? And what obstacles do you face? Those obstacles may be technical, they may be operational, they may be social, they may be all sorts of things. But what are those obstacles and how will you overcome them? Very often, the most important thing about the capital you access is what are the other resources that capital brings along with it besides the dollars. So how will you utilize those capital sources to help you surmount those obstacles? And finally, and this is perhaps, again, equally important to your ultimate objective, what are you willing to exchange for that money? Every kind of money has an intended purpose, what it wants to accomplish, and it has a cost. And as you heard in the animation, venture capital is actually the most expensive form of capital. So what are you willing to pay for the money, right? So money is a vexed topic. We have lots of mythologies about money. The key thing that I want to just convey to you before I let you talk to our panel is that a dollar is not a dollar. A dollar that you take from your savings, a dollar that you bring from customers, a dollar that you don't have to spend, a dollar that comes from a bank, a dollar that comes from an angel or a VC, these are not the same. And really, the thing that I'd like to impress upon you that's touched on in that animation, it said 20% of the fastest growing companies, 20% of the fastest growing companies are venture-backed. The other 80% used all the other kinds of capital and did not have to go the venture route, and were still fastest growing companies. Another way of looking at that, and this is the most recent research from Statista, excuse me, is if you look at the past 12 years of IPOs. The ratio of all IPOs to venture-backed company IPOs varies considerably from year to year. But again, the venture-backed companies are a small percentage. So we have this mythology around venture capital, that it's the best or the fastest or necessary for all companies. In fact, less than 1% of companies actually take venture capital. The rest use all those other means. So again, start with who are you and what do you care about? Not what you see in the press about, about what somebody raised or somebody has a new fund or whatever, but what do you care about? What do you aspire to accomplish with your company? Because if you don't know what you aspire to, it almost doesn't matter which of these things you choose, right? Like, you just do something, it'll take you somewhere. But the point is, if you are super clear about how much money you will need to accomplish what you aspire to, then you can start to figure out the kinds of capital that are most appropriate. And this is excuse the low quality of this page, but this is just a small sampling of all the kinds of capital that young growing companies, including fast growing companies, this is not really even for, what we think of as neighborhood or community or brick and mortar companies, but fast growing companies will draw on. So first and foremost, bootstrapping. What that means is growing based on your own means, right? You may have an additional job that you use to support your company, or you may have a separate line of consulting that you do through your company to help offset its costs, or you may use other means, but you basically run on your own resources and you don't bring in any other capital. As the animation suggested, a lot of companies use credit. I recommend that you think about this as using credit to sort of smooth out your expenses, as opposed to buying things on credit and maxing out your credit cards. That's extremely expensive and very dangerous. There are sources of capital that come from the MIT community itself. There are institute grants and institute support programs and other resources that you can draw on, many of them, to offset your capital needs as well. There are government grants, many government grants, and particularly for those of you who are building technology-driven enterprises, there are many kinds of government grants that are specifically structured to assist young growing companies to commercialize promising technologies and bring them out into the market. There are incubators and accelerators, many of them just here in the Boston area, and you're going to hear from Tatiana as representative of just one of them. There's crowdfunding in a variety of forms. There's, in addition to the kind you probably have seen in many instances, like Indiegogo, to fund things that are just of interest, equity crowdfunding and pre-purchase crowdfunding. So I have this exciting new product. You can sign up on my Kickstarter and you'll receive one of the first production runs, right? That's basically you're asking customers to prepay for the production for your first run of product. Fantastic. And there's also equity crowdfunding, of course, where you can ask people to invest in your enterprise for as little as, say, $10, depending on your needs, and again, how that corresponds with your objectives. Bank loans, of course, in a variety of forms and for a variety of purposes, and again, we're going to have James talk to us about that. But most importantly, the most important way to fund your enterprise is customers. If you can find a way to sell your product or service, even a very basic version of what you envision, or even a highly simplified, highly structured mechanical Turk version of what you plan to offer, right? Where it's really human in the loop as opposed to fully automated or fully envisioned product. that is really the best way to begin to build a solid business model. So, again, this is pretty rapid run through, but the thing I want to leave you with is truly a dollar is not a dollar. And when you're thinking about funding, you really want to interrogate yourself very, very concretely, very honestly. The more clear you can be on these questions, the more you will find that it's easy to make decisions about where to seek funding, what kind of funding, when, how to mix together these various kinds of capital in order to enable your company to succeed. So, with that, we're going to bring up our panel here, but as we start this conversation, I'm going to ask each of you a kind of leading question, and I'll ask you to introduce yourself in brief along with that first question. And so starting with Tatiana on the far end, first of all, again, please give us a little bit of an introduction, better than I did in my capsule intro, and tell us, how should founders think about approaching an accelerator or an incubator or very early stage investors? How should they think about engaging in conversation with organizations like the ones you lead?
Yes. Can you hear me? Sure.
Yeah, I think you're live.
Working, the mic? Okay, cool. So I'm Tatiana, and I am one of the general partners with Learn Launch Fund Plus Accelerator. And we work in the ed tech, education technologies segment, and in relatively early stage. So we work with pre-seed technologies, technology companies. Very big portfolio, more than 75 investments in the last 10 years. And our program that I'm going to address in the question that Julianne asked also evolved over time. And my background is in early stage venture. So basically the last 10 plus years, I've been in working in different countries and across, I call it the bottom stack of the capital pyramid, from now pre-seed through seed, Series A, and also in different technology segments. So the past 6 years in education, and before that, more broadly, including what was called clean tech and now climate tech, and consumer internet and consumer fashion, etc. So how to think about addressing or interacting with an investor like us? I think that the guideline, the blueprint that you gave is true also about talking to someone like us. So in the first place, you have to really understand what is the value that you want to receive from this type of investor. Accelerators, again, I think we live in really, really good times because there are a lot of them. And a very good news is also that there are a lot of accelerators that are really specialized. So there are a few ones, all the names that you know, that are more general tech, broader tech, but there are a lot of specialized resources that specialize in like climate or education like us, or fintech, or other segments out there where you can get really access to really good things that otherwise are not easily accessible on the market. So really understanding who offers what and how this can help your company is the question that you should ask yourself. And this is what I'm also going through as when we are selecting companies for the program. This is what I ask them to do too. So I ask them to ask questions, ask me, how can I be helpful specifically to you, so that they also give me an opportunity to show that I understand their case, and I understand, and we have the resource base that will be able to make a difference for them. In particular with accelerators, it's important because the amount of dollars that you're receiving is relatively small. And it still happens in equity exchange in our case, and in many other cases, it still happens. And what really matters is this service, the program or this like capacity, wraparound capacity around it. So you really have to understand the value, and it should be really, really high in order for you to interact with this type of market players.
Thank you. And on this side now, Carrie, please also introduce yourself properly, and the same question. How should founders think about approaching a program like Majira Project, for example, and how should they think about approaching an investor like Malaika?
Great. Thank you. Happy to be here. So my name is Kerry Bowie, and in terms of background, I actually did undergrad here before this existed. I think there was like barracks here. So I did environmental engineering. I went off to University of Michigan and did a master's in engineering, environmental as well. You know, you talked about climate change before. Before climate change and climate tech was cool. I worked in semiconductor industry for about 10 years. And then I came back up here to see about a girl who I'm now married to. But I did business school, so I did Sloan as well. And then I worked in government, worked for Governor Patrick and Governor Baker. And then I started my own consulting practice. And that led me to the Majira project that Julianne just shared. Majira Swahili for summer. So a nod to the growing season, we try to help companies grow. And we really target founders of color. So either companies led by Black, Latinx, Indigenous founders, or serving those communities, serving those sort of underrepresented or underlooked communities. And we've got a really strong partnership with the Boston Consulting Group, where they do pro bono consulting. And that actually gets to maybe answering a little bit of Julianne's question. I think any accelerator, you know, as you go into it, sort of like Julianne had the questions, you want to sort of think about, what am I doing in this program? Why am I there? I typically think of 3 C's that you should be looking for in a program. And those are, 1, you know, is it going to connect you to customers? You know, getting back to this piece that we talked about in terms of, you know, financing, having connections to, you know, that first customer, or expanding into another, you know, you got a product line or another revenue stream. So can that accelerator help you do that, or that incubator? The other piece is around capacity or talent. Can they help you with some things you need done, or can they actually connect you to people? You know, we see a lot of, you know, oftentimes solo entrepreneurs or really small teams. You know, as you start to tackle more, you need more. And so they can often help make connections to others and expand your network. And then the last piece is capital. You know, can they give you access to capital, whether through the program itself, you know, maybe and ideally some non-dilutive funding, but also can they just make connections to angels or VCs or bankers that you might not have because you've been doing your tech thing or whatnot. And so I think of that for programs, but also for VCs. It's not just about the money. You know, like Julianne said, a lot of them, both accelerators and VCs are more specialized. And so I'll talk about 2 more things and then I'll wrap up. Out of the Majira project, I came back to my green roots. And so I started another nonprofit called Browning the Green Space. And we actually just launched, actually we'll probably make an announcement of the first cohort that we did in conjunction with Greentown Labs. So Greentown Labs, if you're familiar, is the largest clean tech incubator in the country. So we did a specialized accelerator for BIPOC founders. And so we're going to announce a list of 6 of them, I think on Friday, or definitely by Monday. But that's really specialized. It's in clean tech. It's focused on, you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the last piece I'll share is In doing the work with both Majura and with Brown in the Green Space, a recognition that in the, in the video that we saw from Kaufman, as well as with the presentation that Julianne shared, especially when I think of founders of color, one of the places where all of that breaks down is sort of savings and friends and family. Those sort of tranches disappear oftentimes because there is a income gap, there's a wealth gap, and so there are not these buckets of funds to pull upon, and that's oftentimes your friends and family are in the same boat, and that makes it a lot more difficult oftentimes for those, as well as women, because going back to, I think it was Julianne, your slide deck, it showed the VCs, or maybe it was the Kaufman one, I can't remember, was sort of like the Monopoly guy with a top hat, an old white guy. It hasn't changed too much. They're not wearing the bowler hats, but oftentimes the VCs are, white guys, older white guys. They're getting a little bit younger, but typically they're white guys. And so there's a whole issue of sort of pattern matching, in the sense of, and I'll just give a couple stats and then I'll stop. And they change from time to time, but they hover around the same areas. Julianne gave overall numbers, but if you get more granular and disaggregate them, of the VC money that goes out, and it's not a lot, 3 to 4% of that is getting to women. They're way more than that in the population, and 1% of that is getting to African Americans or Black founders. And if you happen to be an African American woman, I think that number is like less than 0.2%. And so the system is broken, and so that's what we're trying to do with Maleka Ventures, is come in and target founders of color and in a niche space, primarily in climate tech. Because that's what we want to do. We want to add value from the things that we know. So probably went too long, but
That was
hopefully that was
awesome.
helpful.
I just want to do a jargon check. Does everybody know what non-dilutive means? So, perfect. So dilutive capital is like venture capital and angel investors, where they're taking a portion of your company. So you as a founder are being diluted in your ownership of the company. So that's dilutive capital. Non-dilutive capital is like grants or prize money or any other kind of money that does not result in you basically giving a portion of the company in return. Fair? Clear? Awesome. So, third and not least, James, the same question to you, please, if you could introduce yourself briefly, and how should founders think about approaching bankers?
Sure. My name is James Daly. I'm from Needham Bank. I'm a senior vice president. I run our bank's structured finance unit, which is the most complicated, convoluted corporate debt structures we can think of for companies. We'll put it together. My business partner runs the small business unit, and I'll tell you a quick story about one of his clients, and it should make sense at the end, I hope. A guy drops out of high school, starts working as a garbage man, doesn't know what he wants to do with his life, meets my colleague, and he says, I can do this job better than the guy that I'm working for. And my colleague says, how much money do you have? He says, I don't have much. He goes, I have no real education, but I know I can work hard, and I know I can do this job better than him. He goes, well, put a business plan together, come back and show me how you think you can do it better, and we'll talk. So he comes back to him with a little business plan, and he finds on the internet an old garbage truck that's pretty small but pretty worn down. I think it's like 200 grand or something like that. He goes, I want to buy this truck, and then I think through friends and family I can pick up this route and charge this for a barrel, and over time I think I can pay you back. It's sort of like, here's how I'm thinking about it. And my colleague said, that's pretty good. There's a brand new truck for $400,000 out there that's bigger, why don't you buy that one? He goes, I don't have enough money. He goes, well, if I give you a loan for X, can you come up with just a little bit for Y? And you can buy the truck. And if you do that, then your customer base goes from X to Y, and you can start to make more. And they built a business plan together. He took the time and he built it together for him. So fast forward now, I think this was like 10 or 15 years ago. I think maybe he has 50 garbage trucks and makes a few mil a year. He's doing pretty well. I think he went back to his high school and found the teacher who said, you're not going to amount to nothing but collecting trash, and said, look at me now. And one of the things he did was he put his name as big as he possibly could on every truck and made sure that at least one drove by the high school. So he's got a sense of pride in him, for sure, but the moral of the story is he went and developed a relationship with the banker. He trusted the banker. He talked with the banker. He put a plan together with the banker. From our perspective, the numbers are great, yes, that's fine. We're lending other people's money. We need to make sure we get it back. So we only want to lend it to people who we believe will give it back to us. So it's important as young entrepreneurs to build a relationship with a banker. And it can be any banker. People don't go into branches anymore. We get that. There's a lot of resources in branches. And there's people there that can tell you where the best banker is at that firm to go talk to. What you see on the website isn't necessarily what you can probably get, especially when it comes to the SBA, the Small Business Association. The banker's job is to help guide you through that process and help make it work for you and your business plan. That's a great resource. So if you're organized, you have a good plan, you build a relationship, you're thoughtful about what you want to do, you can start small, and if you're patient, you can grow it. The other thing banks can do to help, like, you need to store money somewhere. Cash is going bye-bye, we all get that, but be cognizant too about what fees charged, what it costs to move money, what it costs to secure money, what it costs to have it stolen. People try to rob us every second of every day. It used to be with a gun, now it's online. And it does eventually cost the business. There's business interruption, there's whatever you want to do, lost productivity. And if you do start a business where people are swiping cards, there's interchange fees. Be aware of what those are, because you could be losing 3, 4, 5% without even knowing that there's cheaper options out there. So, there's two sides of it. There's the capital side, and there's like the expense side, and managing what things cost, how to protect that money, how to move it properly, where to move it properly. So, number of different things, but if you have a good business plan, you start talking to people. It might take 20 or 30 meetings to find the right person, but we always believe like it's a relationship. Like, we want to help people grow their business. The bigger you grow your business, the more success we have with you. We really like partnerships. Banking is a very old school thing, and it is driven off of relationships and how people. You just have to take the time to find the right fit. And sometimes it happens overnight, sometimes it takes a couple of years, but if you're persistent, you start asking the right questions, try and do as much as you can face to face with as many bankers as possible, you'll find the right one. They're out there.
So I love the fact that you said it might take 20 or 30 meetings. In the first company I co-founded, I think I pitched more like 200 people before before my co-founders and I found a first investor. So, finding the right match, regardless of the kind of capital, is, I think, a theme you're going to come across again and again. I'm really curious how the three of you think about interacting across the different kinds of capital. So, what do you, when you're working with founders, what do you encourage them to do, or what do you discourage them from in terms of working with different kinds of capital? And I'd like you to take that in whatever order you feel like.
Go ahead.
So the special thing about my current work is that we work with inside a segment that is hugely undercapitalized. So ed tech is it's relatively small. So even though education as a subject area is very personable thing, so I can convince any of you very quickly that there are a lot of problems there, and many investors would agree too, but not everybody wants to put their money to work in this space to fix these problems. And there is a number of reasons for that, and we won't be talking about it. But these companies feel it really, really every day. So it's really fine. I think that for education technology companies, it's harder to find access to capital than to other companies, just because of some market structural reasons of the market. And for us as early stage investors, it's really critical to make sure that they understand the capital spec and that we help them connect and basically you access, exploit, exhaust any possible source of capital that's out there for them. And it starts with non-dilutive capital, which is great. So we have, more than half of our companies received SBIR grants in some shape or form. There is a very interesting for education, an intersection of philanthropic giving and investing where they can go to and also find some funding sources. That's really interesting, not easy to navigate, but it's out there. We also explain them, so we build relationship when they need relationship with banks and similar institutions. We also know where to direct them in what direction. One thing that we that we want them to be careful about is not to go out. So all of them need to raise more money, of course. After they have worked with us, they need to raise more money in order to make things happen, grow faster, et cetera, et cetera. And one of our strategies also to work on a plan that will work for them, that will not be over-aggressive and will just kill you or will make you lose a lot of time, but will be really, really stage appropriate for you and connect you with the funders that are stage appropriate for you. It's like really critical. And in some cases, these are angels. In some cases, these are early stage investors, so they're different sources of capital. So for us, it's important to build a plan that is realistic, and then they will be able to execute on. Because the first thing is they come and they're like, oh, my next raise is going to be $5 million. We're like, oh, okay, how about we start with like 400,000 and then build out this plan and make this happen? And it makes a lot of sense. So we act in the interest of these companies, given this advice, for two reasons. A, it's that you can go and try to do that, but you will lose time, and time is of value. So we want you not to lose your time because it's a very, very precious resource. But we also want you to capture as much value as possible for yourself too, because of the dilution effect and everything that happens on the cap table. You don't want to take too much and give too much away at a too low price, right? So it's better to build it in incremental manner, and in this way you basically are the shareholder value stays with the company and with the team, whereas is being blown out, and also with some without real plan behind it.
I like what you said about being realistic. We see financial statements from companies all the time, And they all do the same thing. They all to the moon. And every time I see that, I go, no, like you're not thinking this through. Like it's my job on the larger side to tear that apart and make sure in the worst case scenario, we still get paid back, right? So we take what they give us on the financial statements and bring them back down to reality. Their job is to know their business and their customer base, and our job is to make sure that they have realistic expectations about how the numbers are gonna work. And it fits right into your point where everybody thinks that like they're gonna hit it big in like a few years' time and like life is gonna be great. It's like, no, you have to live and breathe this stuff 24/7, 365 in order for it to work, and it's gonna take a long time. There are very, very few people who can do it in a very short period of time, and you know, I think we've all heard those examples, and the reality is it takes time, and you have to be super, super patient. And if you build the right relationships with the right people behind you, you know, whether it's a good CPA or a good attorney, it doesn't have to be somebody from KPMG, or it shouldn't be anybody from one of the big law firms. I mean, it's outrageous what they charge. There's plenty of good advisors that will do small business stuff, and they're probably better for you because they will actually take the time and give you real advice instead of watching the clock tick, right? So be realistic, and, you know, as a banker, I want to see real numbers. If they go up and go down, like, I'm excited about that. I'm like, okay, you get it. Like, you understand what it's going to take to do it. You know, I turn down deals all the time because the numbers keep going up. I'm like, no, you're not considering saturation here. You're not considering a recession here. Like, what you're telling me isn't, like, I don't believe your plan. So the more realistic you are with where you need to start and kind of taking it one step at a time, then, you know, be persistent, be patient, take your time, build those relationships. You can start to slowly gain that traction that you need and go from there.
Yeah, what I would add is, I think when working with entrepreneurs or, you know, startups, small businesses, just trying to help them along the way. Oftentimes, they've got a great idea, they're doing something, but they haven't done this before. You know, getting to the point of being a serial entrepreneur is great, and that's why oftentimes that second or third thing is where you hit it big, because you made those mistakes, you figured these things out. There's wisdom in going through that process if you have the opportunity to get there. And so really trying to just help people with that process, because you know, I see it a lot. And so, you know, I haven't gone through it, but I've seen people go through it, so I can go, well, maybe you should do this, or maybe you should do that. And a lot of it is just helping people to understand what's going on. Like even the short sort of teasers and, you know, slide presentations you saw today help to think about, well, how do banks think? How are VCs thinking? What's the process of sort of underwriting? And, you know, people aren't just giving you money. they want the money back. Or any way they give it. Even some of that non-dilutive funding, they're doing it for a reason.
They have an exit plan.
I here at MIT, I'm a core instructor for the National Science Foundation for the Innovation Core program. And so a lot of the companies, you know, we're trying to help tech come out of labs and become commercialized. So we're teaching students and, you know, postdocs and graduate students how to think like they're running a business, because that's where we want them to do. And a lot of that, you know, the reason they're giving some of that non-dilutive funding is so you can see if anybody really cares, you know, about this tech that's coming out of the lab. It saves them money if we can figure out really quickly in like 7 or 8 weeks versus them just pouring a lot of money into your research for years and years. So everybody has an angle, and really trying to understand what that is, and also understanding even VCs that are taking part of your business, you know, they're not taking it, they're investing think of it as an investment, but only take it if you need it. You know, VC money is it's pretty much pouring gasoline on a fire. You got something, you need it to go really fast, and you need to, you know, like the slide presentation, you're racing, you're in a race, you got to get there fast. You don't have the luxury of time, and so you need that money to speed up the work that you're doing. So I think that there's a piece there. And I'll say on the, you know, sort of going back to sort of founders of color and women, I think, you know, James talked about bringing numbers back down. I oftentimes do it the other way around. I think there's underselling versus overselling.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's easy for me to go, what are you talking about? You can do this or do that. You know, what I typically will tell people is, you know, a black woman founder and a white man founder, both doing solid B work, exactly the same B work. That black woman is going to think she's doing C work. That white guy is going to think he's doing A+ work. And that makes a difference when you're in front of a VC and you're selling, because people eat up confidence. And so I go back to James' story about the garbage man. He was confident.
He was.
He knew what he was gonna do, and that goes a long way. And banks even will take risk. You know, I think the slideshow was saying banks oftentimes, and I see it now, you need to have collateral oftentimes, or they'll say, we need 3 years of upward positive thing, which feels like, well, I don't need it if that's what's going on. But like they said, he's trying to get the money back. In that garbage story, it was de-risked because it was almost like purchase order financing in a sense, because he said, I've got routes which you can monetize, and they've got money. So now if I'm the banker, I'm going, yeah. And the banker's even thinking more. The banker wants to get more money. He's like, not an old truck, let's get a new truck. Let's get a bigger truck. Let's bring more money in. So everybody's got an angle. What we try to do is help people to understand how all of that works.
Awesome. So I want to highlight, Carrie specifically mentioned the NSF Core program. One of the ways that you can access extremely high value advisors and experts in the specific areas your enterprise is facing, whether that's technology or sales or marketing or IP or whatever it may be, is through the MIT Venture Mentoring Service. So for those of you who are members of the MIT community, VMS is free for all members of the community, students, faculty, staff, alumni, and the quality of advisors you tap into is really extraordinary. So again, thinking back to how do I offset my need for capital? How do I get smarter about the sector? How do I get the insight and the expertise that I need in order to be able to grow my enterprise successfully? That's one way to do it. And again, costs nothing. And of course, for those of you who are at other institutions or part of other communities, there are also other entities as well associated with other communities and with other institutions. And so it behooves you as the founder to really find out, what are all the resources available to me? How do I get access to those, right? I'd love for each of you, as we're getting ready to wind up and go to Q&A, I'd love for each of you to tell, preferably both, but you're welcome to pick either or, a really fantastic success story of working with a founder. Like, how did it go, like, just extraordinarily well? Or a smoking crater story, like, how did it just go unbelievably badly? And again, you're welcome to pick or tell both. Smoking crater stories are actually better because they're more instructive, but your choice.
What are you going to do, the good one or the bad one?
I think that I kind of started low on describing the edtech market, and then I was sitting and thinking like, it's actually really exciting, and there is a lot of new things, and new developments there. And we, in the last, as I mentioned, in the last 10 years, we made 76 investments. Proud of the fact that 66% of our founders are either female or BIPOC founders. And also the capital distribution matches this stats, because you can have half of your CEOs female, but then they receive only 10% of the
Right.
capital deployed all over in the portfolio. That's not the case with us. So we have a lot of exciting stories. So I think I will do the exciting one. And one of my favorite ones is, it's a company called Care Academy. And I like her a lot because I worked with Helen, so with the founder, when she was, so it was 5 years ago when literally it was just her and her co-founder, Madhuri, and they were, so she is in the business of skilling new workers into direct care segment. So, and also skilling them in and upskilling them. So creating career pathways for them. These are, as you can imagine, this is a extremely high demand market given the aging population all over the place, including here. So there is an extreme demand for these type of jobs with extreme attrition because they are very, very low paid. It's hard work and very low paid. So her population she has a lot of migrant workers that are entering this space. And I like this story because she opens the door, they are trained into the jobs, but then they have pathways, so they have options how to upskill themselves, for instance, into a career of a nurse if they want to. Mm-hmm. And this is a wonderful impact story that has a lot of different segments. And when she was starting, basically, and at the moment when I was working with her, literally, she was coming to my place because I couldn't come to meetings. I had like a 6-month-old baby. So, so we were sitting out of my, working on her board reports and setting up the data room for her first serious round of funding together. And she is very, very impressive, extremely hardworking entrepreneur that went through a series of pivots too in this business. So what sounds today is like, oh, that's so obvious. It actually wasn't so obvious. Mm-hmm. So it was a bumpy road, a very, very complex road. And I'm extremely proud of her today. She raised $20 million last year with Goldman Sachs leading the round, which is wow. And I've just 2 weeks ago, or even not 2 weeks ago, a couple of days ago, I see an announcement that they acquired their first company. So they are really having a very, very interesting growth story out there, and she is just the star of all stars, I find.
Yeah, I encourage you to look her up. Helen Adiosa in Care Academy. She's a rock star. I love her. Yeah. Excellent. Story. Excellent win story.
Amazing.
It's, yeah, I think it's, we have more, but she's special, yeah.
So a fantastic success story of working with a founder or a smoking crater.
Yeah, I'll keep it positive.
Yeah,
you keep it positive. One of my clients, he went to the University of Alabama right before Nick Saban showed up. And he needed a job, so he was working at the stadium, at the ticket booth. And then Nick Saban shows up, they start winning a ton of championships, and all of a sudden, 20% of the stadium becomes 100% capacity, and he's helping to sell tickets, and he's like, they're on this sheet that's $10, but we're selling them for 25. Like, I need to learn more about this. So he starts getting involved in tickets, works with a ticket agency. Now he is out of college and links up with a couple of his buddies, and they go to Ticketmaster, start working there for a little while, learn a little bit more about the business, and they say, we can do this on our own. And because they built good relationships with vendors and venues and agencies, and because they're really outgoing, and they have a guy who's really good on vision. They have a guy who's really good on numbers. His wife is the lawyer for the company. They kind of had all the right ingredients, people to say yes, people to say no, people to guide them along the way. They called me when I first spoke to Taylor. His name is Taylor. I spoke to him in late April of 2020. This is 10 years into his business. And as you can imagine, in April of 2020, his sales are at zero. And 98% of his business is completely destroyed. I was his 35th banker that he called. And his bank had shut him off, closed him down. He owed them about 24 mil. He guaranteed all of it. And he had no idea what to do. And we said, look, we think we have a program for you. If you give us a little bit of time to learn as much as we can about this business, we can get you 20 mil. A few months later, we closed on it. Got his business saved. He put together a very detailed plan about what he wanted to do and how he wanted to save it and turn it around. And the second the vaccines rolled out, he's back up to 250 million in sales. And all the people who he couldn't get tickets for, are coming back to him. The venues love him because he did right by the venues. He got their money back when he could. And now he's, I like a lot of different things, and my son's really into Formula One racing. So I said, hey, have you looked into Formula One? He goes, I have no idea what that is. I know NHL, NBA, and NFL, and Broadway. I'm like, look at Formula One. Next thing you know, there's 3 huge races in the US, and he got into the Miami race, and he goes, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Thank you for introducing me to Formula One. We are now selling 100,000 tickets at each race. And they only, you only get 300,000 people in for those weekends, so they're controlling a third of it. So it's a pretty cool success story. Again, like, my main message is stay organized, push as hard as you can. If you believe in your plan, we'll believe in it too. One step at a time, and if you find the right people, we can guide you along the way.
Cool. I think I've got some crater things, but I
Don't do it.
don't feel like I can share. I actually need to reach out to some of the folk who can see, because I think there would be good stories, but I don't feel like I can sort of divulge everything now, and I think it's too telling even if I try to scrub it. So I'll stay positive as well. And I've got a few, so I'm trying to think of the best one, and maybe I'll do a couple to show sort of also the work that we do in our accelerators. Oftentimes it is tech-based because of sort of my background in engineering and everything, but also we try to do some things that aren't so high-tech, and they can do well too. And I think there's also an opportunity for companies that aren't venture backable, that they just need sort of maybe revenue-based financing or some interesting things to do. So while I'm launching a venture capital fund, I also sit on the investment committee of an organization here in Boston called the Boston Hadzima Project, and it's really it's loans, but loans from the community. And so from Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, those neighborhoods, people pooling small buckets of money, and then they've gotten additional money, and they flipped the sort of risk structure. So those people given that smaller money, have less risk and can get more returns, because the whole thought is to sort of democratize sort of investing and give back to the community. So I'll give a company that is part of their group, but also a part of ours, as well as an MIT alum. Cassandra Campbell, and then I'll tell another one really quickly. Cassandra Campbell, I met, I think at a Harvard Black Policy conference when I was working at the Department of Environmental Protection doing some food stuff. She worked on the, I think the food project with her co-founder, Jackson. And they were just saying, we want to get healthy food into the community. And they, they did a Kickstarter. It sort of ties a lot of the things that you're talking about, all these things that aren't VC funding. So they did a Kickstarter so they could buy a food truck. They tried to do that food truck in Roxbury in their community, but realized that that wasn't where, people still didn't have the disposable cash flow to do that. They moved and started doing things in the city, in the financial district or down. That took off. They went through our Mujira project. When we did that, we helped them to think about, we and the team at BCG helped them to think about marketing and expanding. So they actually started a catering business. And so went from, growing in the neighborhood to food truck to a catering business. And then, during the pandemic, they actually, they were in Commonwealth Kitchen. So they started through an incubator, a food incubator, doing it. But then they started doing so much. They helped during the pandemic, but they were able to just buy their own brick and mortar like a year or so ago in Dorchester. And they're also doing home meal delivery. And this has been a long process. This has been like 7 years going through this process. But the cool thing now is they've got returning citizens, people who've been formerly incarcerated, working with them. They're paying them a living wage. They're getting like 401ks and, vacations and stuff. And so that piece is really supporting the community. But most of the money came from organizations like, Boston Impact Initiative that are doing different, types of things, and angels. And we helped them sort of along that process with, marketing, technical, legal, all this assistance. So super excited about that one. And then the other one I will talk about quickly is one of my, actually when I came to Sloan, the guy, when I came to visit, so I came to visit, and I went to a marketing class, and this guy ran, grabbed me, he's like, come, let's go. We did it. After I graduated, I stayed connected with him. And the guy's name is Marcus Wilson. And so he did Cornell undergrad, he's an engineer, but he finished at Sloan. We stayed connected. He worked at Reebok and was just thinking about different ways to do things. He went from Reebok to Idea Paint, and so I'm sure there's probably Idea Paint on he was chief marketing officer there. He's a marketing guy, and he took all the stuff that he learned in marketing, and he was a fitness buff, and he got it with his partner, and they said, we're going to make a shoe company, and so they did a shoe company for CrossFit, very niche,
Thanks.
but it has blown up. So the name of the company, if you're familiar in the CrossFit space, is No Bull. And so he is, doing really well. And a lot of the, because of the relationship and whatever, sort of able to get in and invest, and are super excited about that. And it's not super high tech. A lot of it is marketing. It's the way they're doing it, building a good solid shoe, building around people, doing the customer service, and doing all that piece. And really, they're generating a lot of revenue, but there's this piece of racing, so they are venture backable, and they are, doing rounds and doing that with a CPG company.
Thank you. All right. I'm going to come back to you at the end after Q&A for, one line of your best advice to leave everyone with. But let's have your questions. Who has a question? And I think Joe wants everybody to use microphones for the sake of people who are joining remotely.
Yeah, hi. My question is for Tatiana. So, like, I'm very inspired by your story about the venture that successfully raised this much money after like a series of growths, and then she really had an impact. And so, my question is that, like, during the fundraising processes, like, what is the range for people who are, let's say, for specifically for your accelerator, like for pre-seed C, and then like Series A, like the 20 million, is it like for Series A that she raised, and how long did it take for her to raise this much money? Because as a startup, you wanted to move quickly. You don't want to drag on because it's, yeah, fundraising, like time is important.
Timing of fundraising. Okay, that's a great question. And a quick answer is that it takes much longer than everybody thinks. Way, way, way longer. Even, and because it's about relationship building. And building relationship takes a lot of time. So if if you see in the headlines that someone raised that Series A, you can assume that some of the investors that participated in that round have been in conversations with this company for maybe 2 years now, maybe a year and a half now. So because they like to start talking to you a little bit earlier, and they like to observe and just exchange notes and see how it's going, and then when the time is right, then they will be participating in it. So, I mean, the fundraising process itself, if you look at it like from strictly technical terms, right? And in strictly technical terms is that you are ready when you have a plan that makes sense, and then you have also to have your data room ready to go, and then you have really to bring plenty of time to execute on the fundraising process, because as a CEO, it basically takes, you need another day in a day in order to be doing it. It's a lot of, outreach, conversations, follow-ups, new things, talking to multipliers. It's a non-stop, you're selling basically. In this case, you're selling the most important thing you have, you're selling your company. So it takes a lot of time. And then in technical terms, I would say that it's probably like at least 9 months, right? So from being like ready, and this is one of the things that we work with companies on. We want to make sure before they go out to investors that they are ready to have these conversations with them. And to be ready means that you have to be able to answer any question that you are sent within like literally 24 hours. Because if you don't do that, you're just losing momentum, and then it's like the never-ending back and forth and back and forth. And you have to think about that in a round like Series A, oftentimes you may have like 15 different parties that participate. It's really unbelievable, but if you look at the cap tables, and it's not visible because in a press release you will see like 3-4 names dropped, and then we'll say backed by existing investors, but in actuality you are trying to move at the same pace a group of like 20 very, very sophisticated people that have very complex processes that are different to make a decision on the same day so that the money comes into your bank account, and then you can close that and send them, and do the closing binder. So it's a complex process. Just because of the complexity, it takes time. But then most importantly, I'm coming back to it, it's the relationship building component that you don't see, right? That goes beyond this technical. And it's basically if you are a venture, a venture profile type of company, you never stop fundraising. So that's another point, that you always sell. It's just that you don't always immediately have the exchange as you talk, but you continuously sell. And Helen is great. So she is talking to investors on any given day. So she is talking to everybody on any given day, and this is necessary in order to be able to execute it when you are technically ready for it. So it's complex, and it's a long. It's not weeks, it's months. Yeah.
Other questions? Who else has a question for our panel?
Hi, my name is Umbreen. Thanks for the input, really very helpful. So I think I heard you say in the beginning, when in the intro, that potentially being able to generate revenue, even if it's like a human-based model before you go to tech, is a reasonable or maybe a good model. So is that something where you establish a customer base or you establish a brand, and then you like go to tech and that you turn it into a technical process and then you fundraise? Or can you talk to me about how you've, like, different patterns you've seen in that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm sure the panelists can speak about this as well. There are lots of different ways that people have gone about this. So let's say, for example, that you have you're developing
I'll give you, I'll tell, what I'm trying to develop is a
sure.
coaching model, a health navigation model for midlife women. And maybe starting initially with human coaches or human navigators, understanding what women want, and then utilizing that to turn that into a digitized process to be able to scale.
Perfect. So ideally what you want to do is start off, is everybody familiar with the acronym MVP? In this context, not talking about sports. So minimum viable product, or it may be a minimum viable prototype, not even product. So really, ideally, you want to start off even with your coaching model with the barest possible structure that someone will pay for. And I mean the barest, right? So the impulse that we all have as founders is to not want to go out with something that isn't really beautiful and doesn't really meet our high expectations. But what you really want to do is go out with something that is actually kind of ugly and clearly not quite complete, and get people to pay for that. And use what you learn from them to flesh it out, because what you think, no matter how brilliant you are, what you think is the right solution is almost certainly wrong, right? We all have our own ideas about what the value proposition is in our customers' minds, but that doesn't matter ultimately. The only thing that matters is what the value proposition is in their minds. And the only way to learn that is to go out and find people who are willing to pay for some bare bones version of your product or service, right? And then adapt what you gather from them to build it out, right? So if you're literally starting with people in service model, right? And then building a productized version of that after, fantastic. If you're starting even with a productized model, it still makes sense to not try to like build an algorithm-driven product right away, but to really keep you and your early team members in the loop, looking at the data, looking at the customer feedback, looking at what's happening, and building the algorithm basically from what you learn, right? And the reason that's so important is because you've heard the panelists talk about wasting time, right? Time is the only truly inelastic resource, right? Like you can't do anything about time. So you want to spend your time to the greatest value you possibly can. And if you spend a lot of time building something out, only to discover that you missed your market by 5 degrees, right? Then you have to go back and redo it. And that doesn't even take into account whatever it costs you to do that, right? But you've lost that time. So you really want to make the very best use of your time in preparing to go to market, to understand your customers as well as you possibly can, even before you take that minimum viable product or prototype to them, but then start off with something that's like not polished and not finished, right? And learn from that. The examples that you've heard None of the fantastic success stories started off with a finished product or a finished business model that was exactly right. Not one of them. Yes? Down here in front. For the benefit of the folks who are tuning in.
Yeah, so this question is for the entire panel. I'm curious as to what are the top 3 traits you guys look for when investing in a founder?
Investing in what?
In a founder.
Oh, in a founder?
Yes, in an entrepreneur, yeah.
Character, character, in character. Like, you know, we got to work with you. We're in it. You know, my business is in it for the long term. We're not traders. Like, we don't treat our clients as if we're going to trade them tomorrow for something else. We're in it together. So, like I said earlier, if you believe in what you're building and you can show us what you believe in, you know, we'll more often than not we'll figure it out.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I think for me it's so definitely, you know, character, and all these things go to character too. So it could be sort of character, because they're synonymous, but character, integrity, hard work. Because I think you have to, and I'll give an example. Like Cassandra and Jackson from Fresh Food Generation, hardest working people I ever seen. They're like in it, doing it, and to the point where, you know, it's having other folk advocate for them and go, okay, you gotta pay yourself, you gotta do this, you gotta do that. You can't just, you know, you can't burn yourself out. But another one of our founders through our Majura project, a guy named Derek Canton, he did WPI, he's got a company called PayerPay. And I would meet with him like after, like even as people alumni, we would meet on a regular basis, like monthly or quarterly. But actually, it was exciting. I got to, in a sense, just be his cheerleader. We didn't get in on the round, but you know, he said, "I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna raise this much." And I got to like check in with him. We'll say we check in every few weeks, and I saw him do it and all that. But his co-founder left, and right as they were about to raise. And there's a piece in you that may say, we're almost done, let's just do it. But he was like, no, you can't do that. You just got to be open and just share, this is where we are. And when he did that, you know, you work it out. You know, like you said, you work it out with the investors who are already in. And he actually got another CTO, came in, much better fit, and then it just took off. But you got to be able to do that. And so I think those are the things that we look for, you know, in founders.
Yeah, it's great, and I think that I will be just saying the same in different words. But one of the things that's really important to us, for instance, is coachability, because we work with founders really closely over extended period of time, and if someone is not receptive to feedback, it's kind of difficult. And again, it's not that. It doesn't mean that we're looking for someone who 100% follows direction, right? So, but coachability, you know, it's about reflection, about what you hear, and communication. So this is one thing. Second of all, it's resourcefulness. I think that this is great, and this is, for instance, one of the things where I'm learning from founders many things. So they come and they're like, oh, look at what I figured out, and they're like, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. And it's resourcefulness. It's about finding, you know, ways out when it looks like there's no way out, you know, and finding people who will be helping you with advice. I mean, we talked about different flavors of capital and nuance of capital here. One of the very important layers of capital stack is also social capital, and to me, this is one of the resourcefulness and being able to attract social capital to your company is one of the things that can make you stand out, especially when you are early on. There is just you plus maybe one more person. But you can come and tell me, but I have a group of these 7 amazing people who are very, very busy that are actually helping me. So this basically builds trust and creates trust and credibility around you, and it's always very, very positive. And then another thing, it's grit, and we see it a lot in edtech companies especially, because the market is different, and you really have to be into it, not to drop the ball. And it's measured also in how people respond to things amongst, so just in a very recent diligence, we were asking like really, really tough questions that were coming over as if it's like the deal is killed, so we are not doing it. And then the entrepreneur, she kept coming back and she's like, no guys, I don't understand it. So here it is, here's the answer. I don't buy it. The conversation isn't over. And then we sat at the end and we were like, wow, she's really cool. So, I mean, yes, we understand the risk profile, but she will figure it out. Like, she will be really drilling till, she gets what she wants to. And this was great because, this was a great personality. So it's about character, right? So therefore, I'm talking about same things, just in different words. And we've on our end, I think that one big difference about us is that we are extremely flexible. So we have solo founders, we have companies that come, and 2 people call themselves CEOs, and we help them figure out how to navigate that and how the org chart in the company looks like. We have a lot of female CEOs, as I was mentioning that before. So we are really extremely flexible about how the founder, how the team can look like. So it's not really, I think that if you just, because there are some people that say like, no solos, like we don't do solos. And I think that you are missing out, but that's okay. And in some cases it's religious, that's okay to follow. So we have flexible minds.
Awesome,
So,
thank you all.
I would just add to that, also looking for a really strong sense of the founder's character, and then what I call ground truth. So they have to have some kind of distinctive insight that they're pursuing about their sector, but I look for ground truth. So how have they tested that insight? What can they show me that demonstrates that insight is credible, or that they've validated it in some way? Because if they're just pursuing an idea, they're not ready, right? We are past time, so we can take another question if that's okay, and then we'll have the last with closing advice, words of advice.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you, panelists. So in the past, 4 sessions, in the past 4 sessions, we've talked a lot about, there was a focus on failure and, how the rate of failure to success. So I would love to hear some kind of insight into why these people failed and what type of mistakes they made. I think we learn much more than that from success stories. So yeah, just a bit of insight, maybe not to reveal too much information.
So maybe not a failure story, but why?
Yeah,
like,
why?
What's a failure cause?
Yeah, and I think James alluded to one of them with the ticket master, or what? No, not ticket master, the ticket seller. A pandemic, or a global pandemic happens, and you fail. We had a few companies exactly the same way. In the food service business or doing something, nobody's going out anymore. So we've seen a lot of great restaurants fail because of that, and that's
Right.
no thing. Craigie owned wonderful, but just couldn't sustain not having people come out. I can think about Trying to think some of the others. Some of the others, I think not sharing. I've seen some founders where don't want to open up, don't want to share that what's going on. Sort of, closed mouths don't get fed, and I can't help you if you don't let me know that you're in, that things are going wrong. If you're running out, like the guy came to you and was like, I'm in trouble, if he waited another 6, 8, 9 months, you might not have been able
Right.
to do anything for him. So you got to be able to reach out. So I think that piece, sort of, being overconfident or like super prideful, has led to failure. Well, I'll stop. Those are a few that I've seen that sort of have led to the sort of demise, not necessarily of the founder, but of the enterprise. And I think, Julianne talked about the venture mentoring service. I know, and I'm a mentor there. I've been doing that 13, 14 years. We focus on the founders, not the companies. Companies can fail, but if we keep working, hopefully the failure piece is important. Is it Kara? I can't remember, Kara Penn or someone, the Fail Fast, the book she did with Fiona. Failure's not bad. Learn from it, and don't sort of wallow in the mire of it. Figure out what didn't work and keep it moving.
Yeah, I would say probably the number one reason is owners take their eye off the ball. Like you don't have to have the greatest constant innovation or adaptation, but if you take your eye off the ball, in the wintertime start going to Florida every Thursday afternoon, coming back every Monday, like things tend to slip. Or you grow too fast. That's a big one too. You bite off more than you can chew. Something happens along the way and you're trying to juggle too much, and then it can all come crashing down. So slow and steady does win the race. Like again, I'm old school. I'm wearing a tie. Slow and steady will win the race with me all the time, and you can still be very successful and profitable and lucrative. So.
Yeah, this is great. So when I'm thinking about this question, I think that there are some like externalities, so things outside of your control, right, as the market. In the venture world, interestingly, which is like really, really bitter for us, is that the market isn't ready to embrace your technology. So it's time to market, and it just drags you. It like takes longer, and then you can't raise, and then oftentimes it's then a technology sale for pennies, and you spend a lot of years of your life. And this is, it's bitter because some technologies like are amazing, and then 2-3 years later, something happens again in the market, and then you see the company that looks exactly like this, and they are successful, and you don't know why. So like time, right? Time matters. But then so this is outside of your control. What's in your control is that I think that there is this absolutely shocking statistics that 80% of companies run out of business, technology companies, because their products are not used with fidelity by their customers. And it's this is the product market fit conversation, and this is a conversation about you being really close to your customer. And we see this with education companies too, which is especially bitter because you have a very long sales cycle. It's like 12 months, and you're like, whoa, we got this district, $20,000, this is amazing. And then you put it into school, and you don't pay enough attention with what's going on with your product, how it's being used. And then like 6 months later, you see that 20% of people that were supposed to use it used it. Sure think it's not going to be bought again next year. So especially in the SaaS economy, which we are in, everything is on renewal, on extensions. It's really, you cannot really relax, and your job doesn't end after you get the contract signed, right? So you are very close to your customer all the time. and looking what's going on with your product and making sure that this is used, because I think that this is really crucial for you to stay in business. Make sure that what you sold is being used, because there are a lot of great things out there and none of them are intuitive and require a lot of investment into, buy-in in order to stay in. And you have to make sure that your product persists, and it requires additional investment that goes beyond just selling it. So I think that this is a big reason why companies are not succeeding.
So I'll just also say, the comet strike is that happens, right? So the market imploded in 2007 and 2008. It was an extinction event. The COVID pandemic, it was an extinction event, right? Like, who knows how many companies went out of business. But I will say that comet strikes aside, I think that some of the most common failure modes really come down to, frankly, not asking questions, right? Like, just going along with an idea, whether it's, being convinced that our product is good, it's already in customers' hands, it's gonna be fine, or just going along with the idea that, oh, hey, like, we're being offered this huge amount of money, we should take it, or whatever. The really chief failure modes all come down to just not asking enough questions and not asking good questions of yourself, of your team, of your customers, of your capital sources, of your other partners, of your vendors, right? Like, as founder, particularly as founder CEO, you should be an information acquisition entity. Like, that is your job. You are asking questions, you are learning constantly, and you are taking those learnings back to your company so that it can grow and evolve in response to ever-changing conditions. Okay, so we're way past time. And quick one line of advice from each of you, please.
So can we start on the other side?
I guess my quick piece, and it is, you hear it in these things, is be relational, not transactional. And relations are built on three things, and we've talked about this already in a lot of the comments, but trust, communication, mutual respect. So if you're not listening to the voice of the customer, you're not asking questions, you're not communicating, you probably want the people you've invested in. Helen is right, I'm on her distribution list, I get the reports, like, I know what's going on. You've got to do that, and that builds trust, because I know what's, you know what's going on, and you're showing people respect when you do that, because you talk about lifetime value over cost to acquire a customer. That's not transactional, that's relational. You want people to come back. Her book story was about, it was transactional, not relational. Because if you're relational, you keep going to those teachers, you understand what's doing, you change the product, you listen. They weren't listening, and they won't get that sell again.
Yeah, I've said it a bunch of times. Get organized, help us see what you see, be patient with it. There'll be ups and downs for sure. If drive what you want to drive, but make sure you bring the right people to do it too. And again, just take your time. Nothing happens overnight as much as we all want it to. To your point about fundraising, like, everything is going to take a little bit longer than what you think, times maybe 2 or 3. And sorry, that's just the way the world's going to work. But if you come ready to play, just like any athlete you saw, any performer you saw, all the training they put in before you make that next step, you have to do exactly what they did. before any event or any game. Just get yourself organized and be patient, and you'll do wonderful things, I'm sure of it.
That's great. And my advice would be, even though the two words that I will use, they will sound like they're contradicting themselves, but they don't. And the art is how to combine them. So be flexible, but stay focused. It's really important for entrepreneurs to stay focused on the important things, but be flexible. And by this, I mean, you know, probably 90%, especially people who start engaging with technology, they're thinking venture capital is the pathway. I see this in the newspaper on my Crunchbase article. I'm going to do that. This is the only way I am going to go, and it's not. And just be flexible in terms of considering and trying other options that are out there available for you in order to figure out what's the right way for you, when is the right time for the right way, or for this particular segment of the way for you. So this, because this is not a straight line, and I think that not being flexible just limits you and robs the options that you otherwise would consider and that otherwise would be really helpful to you and your business.
Okay, thank you all. It's been wonderful spending the evening with you. I wish you all every possible success. Good night.